I've seen some discussions online about what frame rates you should use for videos, and I wanted to share some guidelines that give you a starting point. So I categorize content into three types. Each category is typically better suited to either high frame rates or low frame rates. And when I say low frame rates, I mean 24 frames per second, and high frame rates are 60 frames per second or higher. So the three categories are real content, fake content, and artificial content. Real content is where you want to represent reality as accurately as possible. So the higher the frame rate, the more realistically it will look. And typical examples of that is wildlife scenarios, where you want all the movement to be captured as accurately and as sharply as possible. So you want to have less motion blur, but more frames to capture reality as close as you can. And the same goes for sports or documentaries. And when it comes to vlogs, you don't actually need 60 frames per second, but when you do have 60 frames per second, it looks more real for the viewer. So if the viewer is watching your vlog and you have your video at 60 frames per second, it feels more real. So it feels like the person doing the vlogging is actually there in real life with the viewer from the viewer's perspective, or more realistic anyway. Now, the one area in vlogging which you don't want 60 frames per second is when you're acting or you're pretending to be enthusiastic about the product. So you're doing a product promotion and you want to come across as enthusiastic or excited about the product, where in reality, you're not that excited. You're just trying to sell the product. In those cases, it's better not to have 60 frames per second because the fake emotions will come across much more when you have 60 frames per second. So 24 frames per second will let you deceive the viewer easier. And the other area, again, in real content, when you want to have 60 frames per second or higher, ideally 120 or 240, is when you want to have slow motion. So if you have a really fast moving object in sports in particular, like tennis or golf, then if you want to slow that down, the more frames you have, the better really, because you can slow it down and you will have less motion blur and the viewer will be able to see a frame by frame movement of the ball or the movement of the athlete. So that obviously enhances the viewer's experience. The second type of content is fake content. So this is the content that you typically want to shoot at 24 frames per second. And fake content is where you want to give the illusion of reality to the viewer, even though the content being created is fake, in which case less frames and less data points help in creating that illusion. When the human brain doesn't have enough information, it typically makes up the missing parts, which is what happens when you have low frame rates, like 24 frames per second in a movie. And also the motion blur comes into the equation here. So when you shoot 24 frames per second, your shutter speed is typically set at 1/48, and that creates more motion blur than when you shoot at 60 frames per second and your shutter speed is set at 1/120. When it comes to movies, the actor's behavior looks more believable at lower frame rates, whereas with 60 frames per second, the acting, the facial expressions, the body language, the micro expressions, and the fake emotions become way too obvious to believe the content of the movie. And the viewers will start to think, why are these adults acting silly instead of being submerged in the movie? When it comes to news and propaganda, then again, 24 frames per second is better because you want to deceive the viewer from what is actually happening. So you don't necessarily want to represent the reality, or if you do want to represent reality, you want to put a spin on it or a particular angle. And micro expressions are less apparent in 24 frames per second compared with 60 frames per second. So again, this is an area that probably 24 frames per second is better suited. Again, going back to movies, with 24 frames per second, it's easier to give the illusion of fast movement because lower frame rates hide reality better, and the longer shutter speed also creates more motion blur. So if you take a car chase in a movie, these are typically shot at very slow speeds, but then in the movie they made that to look like they've been done at a really fast speed by adding sound effects and changing camera angles constantly, or bring in a zoomed in angle of the actor or the car. And this is something that it's a lot more difficult to realize that it's fake when you're watching at 24 frames per second. And again, the motion blur plays a part in there as well. And the same goes for fighting scenes and fake wrestling like WWE, where motion blur resulting from lower shutter speeds hides a fake punch or kick. Effectively, it reduces the visibility of space between the strike and the target. So it happens so fast, and when you're watching it as a viewer, you won't be able to see the space between someone throwing a punch and the person receiving it, and the motion blur of the skin tone will fill it up anyway if there is any space. And when it comes to advertisement, that falls in the same category of vlogs with acting, where people are promoting content or promoting a product or a service. So this is where people put on fake enthusiasm and act excited to try to emulate positive feelings. Again, the micro expressions will become more visible and less believable with higher frame rates. However, lower frame rates do a better job at hiding these. The third category of content is artificial content. And artificial content is content that can be generated by any means, fake or real, but it doesn't deceive the viewer into believing it is reality. So the viewer is fully aware of the content not being real. Hence, there's no need to reduce the quality of the experience by reducing the frame rate or creating additional motion blur with longer shutter speed. For example, if you're using a virtual reality headset, real-time viewing and response times is crucial to the experience. And the same goes for video games. You want to see what happens as quickly as possible and react as quickly as possible and see those on the screen. With animation, the viewer will essentially just consume the content knowing that it's not real. So there's no reason to have lower frame rates for animations unless it's not a question of quality, it's a question of how practical is it for the animators to create more frames. Anyway, I hope these guidelines help provide a starting point for your video projects, but there are a few minor points I want to mention about frame rates, which indirectly might influence your decision making about what frame rates you choose to use in your projects. The first consideration is cost. The higher the frame rate, the more expensive the camera, the more expensive the memory card, and the more expensive the computer you need to edit the video, and the more expensive the bandwidth to actually distribute the content. It's also worth thinking about your audience. So what is the demographic of your audience? Do they have high bandwidth? Do their devices have high enough processing power to decode 60 frames per second video without lag? Will the extra frame rates contribute anything to your audience? Another thing to consider also is whether you are intending to change frame rates. So are you intending to record at 60 frames per second and then change it to 24 frames per second? Ideally, you would want to record your videos at the frame rate that you will edit and the frame rate that you will export, which will be used by your audience. Now, if you do have to change the frame rates, you should be aware of audio sync issues and jitter, which would be in the form of dropped frames, merged frames, or repeated frames, depending on your video editor tool. So in particular, you should pay a lot of attention to the conversion between frame rates to make sure the number of frames fit into your video in a nice way. So let me try to articulate that in a better way. So if you have 1 second of 60 frames per second video, and you want to convert that to 24 frames per second, then that 1 second will change to 2.5 seconds, 24 frames per second video if you have it as slow motion. But if you want to run that 60 frames per second as 24 frames per second, and the 1 second translating into 1 second in 24 frames per second, then your video editor, which encodes that, will have to either drop frames or merge frames to make that happen. So you'll see that the video will not be as smooth and nice as a video which has been shot at 24 frames per second. Also, when you do shoot at a certain frame rate, typically you set your shutter speed to be different. So let's just say you shoot at 60 frames per second. You usually would set your shutter speed to be 1/120. But if you shoot at 20 frames per second, if you shoot at 24 frames per second, you would set your shutter speed to be 1/48. Now, the shutter speed has an impact on the motion blur. So if you convert your 60 frames per second video to 24 frames per second, then those frames will have a lot less motion blur than a video shot at 24 frames per second, which means when the video is converted, you will not see the best quality, or you will not see the same quality as a video footage that was shot originally with 24 frames per second. And the lack of motion blur might make things look worse. Another consideration, again, which is very similar to the one I just mentioned, is when you do slow motion. So if you have 60 frames per second and you want to fit it into 24 frames per second video, then you need to slow it down by 2.5 times or reduce the speed by 40%. Just make sure you pay attention to the conversion. So are you using 24 frames per second, 25 frames per second, or 30 frames per second for your output? And then do the conversion accordingly so that none of your frames are dropped and none of the frames are merged or repeated. So I didn't go into much detail about these items, but I just wanted to mention them so that you're aware of them. But please let me know if you want me to go into more detail.